the Greek scholars who went to the whole of the Europe had started a revival, a rebirth in classical art and classical literature. So this age, the age of Renaissance, also witnessed the discovery and exploration of new continent, the substitution of Copernican for the Ptolemaic system of astronomy. Astronomy, as you know, is the field that deals with everything that is beyond this physical world. Like it is a kind of metaphysical world. So the decline of the feudal system, the growth of commerce and invention or application of such potentially powerful innovations as paper, printing press, mariners, compass, and gunpowder. So all these things contributed in exploration of new world, new horizons, new imaginations. So the scholars and the thinkers of that day, however, it was primarily a time of revival of classical learning and wisdom after a long period of cultural decline and stagnation. Cultural decline and stagnation, by this you are very much familiar that whatever happened during the Middle Ages, and you should remember the stark differences that how Middle Ages are known as the Dark Ages. Why so? Because Old English literature had already gone up to such heights that with where we already see very great pieces of literature, but during Middle Ages we see nothing remarkable apart from Chaucer's contribution in that particular time period. But Renaissance is the age that talked about various aspects of human civilization, and one of such aspect was humanism, the rise of humanism. We have already talked in one of my previous lectures that what humanism basically means. That humanism means that humans are the prime center of attention in the whole of the universe. Earlier, it was not the humans. Earlier, in during the Greek time, during even the old ages, the center of attention were gods, goddesses. But with this age, the age of revival, we see that humanism came to its forefront, and as the term Middle Ages was coined by scholars in the 15th century to designate the interval period between the downfall of the classical world of Greek and the Roman and its rediscovery at the beginning of their own century, a revival in which they felt they were participating. Indeed, the notion of a long period of cultural darkness had been expressed by Petrarch even earlier. So, Petrarch is an Italian writer. He already had talked about during the Middle Ages, as you know, that Italy had already witnessed such things where the learning of the Greek knowledge was almost preserved. So even at the end of the Middle Ages, particularly beginning of the 12th century, set in motion of the series of the social, political, intellectual transformation that culminated in the Renaissance. So while the spirit of the Renaissance ultimately took many forms, it was expressed earlier by the intellectual movement called humanism. Humanism was imitated by the secular men of the letters rather than by the scholar clerks. So as we have already seen that there was a fight going on between a kind of intellectual fight going on between right wing people and the left wing people. Right wing are the people who believe a religion to be the core of everything, whereas the people of left wing of humanism, they believe that it is human being who should be the center of all attention, because they have the slogan, the man is the crown of creation. So let's see what other writers talk about this particular movement, and we had already started the when we were dealing with William J. Long's book, and we had already seen that this is the age that starts between, you could say, that goes between roughly 1400 to 1550. So let's see. There are some political changes. We today I'm going to focus some of them, such as Henry V, whose erratic yet vigorous life, as adopted by Shakespeare, was typical of his life of his time. First, let Europe feel the might of the new national spirit. So we see that at that time, during the time 1400 or so, Henry V was the ruler of England, and he did what? He led his army abroad in the apparently impossible attempt to gain for himself three things: what? A French wife, a French revenue, and French crown itself. The Battle of Agincourt was fought in 1415. So if you want to read about the detail, you could just go and write about the history of Henry V in Encyclopedia Britannica, and you will find a lot of detail. Here I'm gonna briefly focus on some of the detail, and like his son Henry VI was but a shadow of a king, a puppet in the hands of the powerful nobles who seized the power of England and turned it into the self-destruction. So his son was not that the kind of vigorous man to take the burden of his father's vigor and passion. Rather, he was a, he in a way he was a very lethargic sort of or pessimist sort of person who couldn't continue. So but the age renaissance that we are dealing with, it actually started in the long reign of Henry VIII. The changes are less violent but have more purpose and significance. So his age is marked by a steady increase in the national power at home and abroad, by the entrance of Reformation by a side door, and by the final separation of England from all ecclesiastical bondage in Parliament's famous Act of Supremacy. So they distanced themselves from the Roman Empire, from the Roman Catholic Church. We have already talked in detail about how the power or fight for power between England and Rome continued, and ultimately you see it led to the separation of England ideologically from that of the Roman Empire or from that of the Roman era. Students, as we know that the fight between ideological fight and the fight for power between Catholic Church of Italy and Rome and Protestant Church of England continued, and it led to the separation of English people and led to making of the new Church of England. So that also paved in making English people having pride on their own national ideology. So while English during that period was in constant political strife, yet rising slowly like the spiral flights of an eagle to heights of national greatness, intellectually it moved forward with bewildering rapidly. Printing was brought to England by Caxton 1476 to be exact, and for the first time in the history it was possible for a book or an idea to reach the whole nation. Schools, universities were established in place of the old monasteries. Greek ideas and Greek culture came to England in the Renaissance, and men's spiritual freedom was proclaimed in the Reformation. So Reformation is an idea where they established or restored the ideology of, you could say, national spirit. Reformation is an improvement or an intended improvement in the existing form of condition of institutes or practices that include various political affairs, religious matters, and the conduct of people. So here we see the improvement or change that was marked or brought in religious affairs as well as political affairs. So we see a kind of going back to the classical works, classical ideas of great Greek scholars, as we have already talked about. Different Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and various others. So we see that the Greek ideas and Greek cultures came to England in the Renaissance. Man's spiritual freedom was proclaimed in the Reformation. So man considered himself to be free from that, you could say, bondage of Rome. So the great names of the period are numerous and significant, but literature is strangely silent. Probably they, the very turmoil of the age prevented any literary development, for literature is one of the arts of peace. It requires quiet and meditation rather than activity and stirring life of the Renaissance. So literature, as you know, it documents things that have been experienced by the people. So it talks about the things that have already been, you could say, experienced, such as Wordsworth defines poetry as the recollection of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Tranquility means later on when you are sitting in a peaceful environment somewhere else and then you recall it, and you give the flavor of imagination to the things, and then the you could say changes start appearing. And that is why we see that this time is the time where people experience various activities, but after a few decades, during the time of Elizabeth, literature has seen remarkable progress and the growth. So let's see what are the revival of learning at that time that marked its impact upon the people of literature. So the revival of learning denotes, in its broadest sense, the gradual enlightenment of the human mind after the darkness of the Middle Ages. The name Renaissance and humanism, which are often applied to the same movement, have properly a narrower significance. So we know that change for a betterment, change for learning, change for exploration, change for adventure. A change occurred in the attitude of not only the nobility but also among common people. So the term Renaissance, though used by many writers to denote the whole transition from the Middle Ages to the modern world. Middle Ages is the age that we know is a dark age. Dark age as far as English literature and English history is concerned. And but here, in this new age, we see that everything is new, is more correctly applied to the revival of art resulting from discovery and imitation of classical models in the 14th and the 15th century, whereas humanism applies to the revival of classical literature and was so called by its leaders following example of Petrarch, because they held that the study of the classic literature humanoid, the more human writings rather than the old theology. It shows human being grab the attention of writers, literary writers paid attention to the ideology, to the problem of human being of that age, rather than putting emphasis or focus upon various gods and goddesses and their fights, as we have already seen during the Greek time. Even in Old English literature, god and goddesses were the center of attention, such as your primary text Beowulf, that also documents the life of various metaphysical creatures, various supernatural creatures, where human beings were not the part of any plane, rather it was those superhuman beings, god, goddesses, brave people, they were dealing with all those activities. So the best means of promoting human interest is humanism. So we can term the revival of learning to curb the whole movement, whose essence was, according to Lamartine, the man discovered himself and the universe. As you remember that Urdu's words, अपने मन में डूब कर पाजा सुरागे जिंदगी. So the essence of life is learning about man's himself, as the concept of Iqbal is also very much relevant. खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रजा क्या है. So this your own ideology, self belief, self reliance, self, you could say, discovery, be paved the path of human advancement in that particular age. So during Middle Ages, man's whole world consisted of narrow Mediterranean and the notions that clustered about it. So the Mediterranean, it was a kind of metaphoric reference to a circle or the limited scope, that this little world seemed bounded by impassable barriers, as if God had said to their sailors, hitherto shalt thou come, but no farther. So the people during Middle Ages did not adventure, did not cross certain boundaries that they had already imposed upon themselves. But during this new age, they had crossed all those barriers, and man's mind also was bound by the same narrow lines. We'll see how these particular ideology was limited in the Middle Ages, but in the, you could say, New Age, human being started reviving things. The revival stirred these men as the voyages of Vasco da Gama, Columbus, and we had already talked in our previous lecture how the adventure about the whole world and how Columbus, trying to find the new world, started himself or found himself shipwrecked in America, and then with this particular voyage of Christopher Columbus started a whole new era of colonialism, or to be more exact, British colonialism. So first came to the sciences and inventions of the Arabs, making their way slowly against the prejudice of the authorities and opening men's eyes to the unexplored realms of nature. So there is the Arabian role as well. Darul Hikmat, we had already talked about the time of Mahmud al-Rashid, 1066 to be exact, when Muslim scholars under the leadership or under the patronage of Ibn Sina or Avicenna started that discovery. But in this age, we see that the literature the of Greek that was already translated by Muslims into Arabic later on gradually made its way to English language, and the flood of literature with the new art of printing carried swiftly to every school in Europe, revealing a new world of poetry and philosophy. Scholars flocked to the universities as adventures to the new world of America, and there the old authorities received a death blow. So old authorities were no longer respected. New era, new passion, new fashion, everything became the center of attention of that particular age. So we can see that how Renaissance went to its height. High Renaissance art, which flourished for about 35 years from the early 1490s to 1525, when Rome was sacked by the imperial troops, revolved around three towering figures. These three towering figures are from the field of painting and arts. Leonardo da Vinci. Students, Leonardo da Vinci was the first one. He was the greatest among all, you could say, literary artist, or to be exact, painter of his age, and he was ultimately the Renaissance man, a solitary genius to whom no branch of study was foreign. So we can see, we can, if we just Google something about Leonardo da Vinci, so there's a website net, you could access that, and here in that website you could see that this man is in fact Leonardo da Vinci. And here let's see what does this website talk about his greatest. So he is among greatest influence among the remaining people. He is among the most influential artists in history, having left a significant legacy not only in the realm of art but in science as well, each discipline informing his mastery of the other. Da Vinci lived in a golden age of creativity among such contemporaries as Raphael and Michelangelo as well. So you could read about his contribution to the field of you could say painting and art, and further if you go a bit down, you will see this is the primary thing that Leonardo da Vinci is famous, and you must have already heard about this portrait of Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. So he has already created other such masterpieces, and let's see what other contributed. Raphael, he was also the greatest among people of you could say art. He created works that perfectly express the classical spirit and harmonious, beautiful, serene environment that he depicted through his work. So you and the third among these great is Michelangelo, who used to build sculptures. And as you can see that he created one such sculpture of Pieta of St. Peter's in Rome and David. So you could read about these great artists and about their works because they indirectly contributed a lot to the literary writings as well. Directly, they are the people of, you could say, art, but as you know, art and literature are closely connected to each other. So, therefore, the contribution of these painters is also very significant in this particular regard as well. So we can see that in the next chapter of the book by William J. Long, in this chapter we can also see that how you could say that the people of that particular age of Renaissance and were you could say very much into the spirit of Renaissance, and you could see that the heading of this chapter is also the literature of the revival. So revival in that particular time period of 150 years, man's greatest contribution to literature, man's mind were too much occupied with religious and political changes, and with the rapid enlargement of the mental horizons, to find time for the peace and leisure which are essential for literary results. So peace is very much important and leisure is very much important, because you at this time you are above the level of your survival, and when you have passed your survival level, and then comes the level of pleasure, or the level of leisure, where human imagination could walk to the greatest extension, perhaps also the floods of newly discoveries or newly discovered classics, which occupied scholars and the new printing process alike, were the very word by their very power and abundance a discouragement of the native talent. So we could see that in that particular time, these classical revival helped human beings, and it revived their interest in the classical works. So on the continent also, this new interest in the classics served to check the growth of the native literature in Italy, especially. For a full century after a brilliant age of Dante and Petrarch, no great literature was produced. So it also happens in literature among, if a genius goes to extreme height, it becomes very much a kind of difficult sort of, uh, you could say, destination for the coming generation, such as we see that Shakespeare was one such great writer, and no other writers could match his caliber. Similarly, in poetry, we could see John Keats, and when we talk about Urdu literature, we could see Ghalib is among the top ranked literary writers whom native spirits couldn't tackle, and the like they couldn't follow the traditions or high norms set by these great writers. And the truth is that these great writers were like Chaucer, far in advance of their age, that the medieval mind was too narrow, too scanty, furnished with the ideas to produce a varied literature. So we can see that such people are far ahead as far as literary merits are concerned in their age, and the people of that age find it very difficult to follow that particular spirit and that particular age and passion. We'll talk about further influence of Renaissance and upon the works of literature in detail in my second video. So stay focused, and see you in the next video. Thank you very much for your attendance and patience.